I was 19 years old, sitting in a complex math problem in Louisiana, studying engineering. And I became very frustrated doing these math problems. I looked up at the rest of the students in the room and realized that they were a lot better than I was at doing math problems. But I was different because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And while their focus was graduating and getting a job, my focus was on graduating to create jobs. I began my entrepreneurial journey when I graduated. I started my company in New Orleans, Louisiana, a property management real estate company, and struggled starting my company and growing it. We started on the second floor of a warehouse in a closet with myself and my business partner. It wasn't until I found this peer network called Entrepreneurs Organization that I learned from my peers from an entrepreneurial standpoint and started to grow my business. I met my wife, we got married. The business was growing rapidly with the help of my friends from Entrepreneurs Organization, and in 2004, I made the Inc. Inner City list of one of the fastest growing businesses in the United States. Simultaneously, my wife got pregnant with not just one child, not two, but triplets. So I found myself with a rapidly growing business and a rapidly growing family. And the unthinkable thing happened in 2005, the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. Please roll the video.
Classic military operation. Attack the enemy with overwhelming force.
We're in the eye wall.
Cut off his ability to communicate.
Take the enemy's eyes out. Take his ears out. Then fix him so you can't maneuver.
This whole place is going underwater.
But this is no sneak attack. The aggressor announces her intentions. Experts predict the date, the time, even the place where she will strike. And yet somehow, a natural disaster spirals into an unnatural human catastrophe.
We're devastated.
We haven't eaten in 3 days.
What turns Katrina into one of the deadliest hurricanes of modern times?
No water, no food.
We don't have a home.
We lost everything.
Why does it take so long to respond to the cries for help? Who makes the decisions and why?
People got to do something. You ain't got no more food.
We got babies out here. We got handicapped people.
2 sons. On the floor. She's dying right now. 2 people died already.
Where's people? Where's the mail?
Please, somebody.
We need some help out here.
Get out of here. We want to get out of here.
I don't even know if my kids are alive.
So I found myself in one of the most industrialized nations in the world, one of the most innovative and entrepreneurial nations in the world, with a rapidly growing business and a rapidly growing family. After I re-entered New Orleans after the disaster, I was standing on the roof of my house with 9 feet of water, 5 feet of water in the business, looking for the dead bodies of my neighbors, where my children were playing in the streets 3 days before. And in that disaster, there are these piercing moments of clarity. Piercing moments of clarity. And that clarity is one of, after the immediate trauma is taken care of, we have some of the best experts in the world on addressing the trauma immediately after a natural disaster. But what I realized is Hurricane Katrina didn't cause the problems, it revealed all the problems in my personal life, my family life, my community, my state, and the world. And in reality, it's all about having vision, leadership, and communication, and an ecosystem that supports small businesses and entrepreneurs. Because in New Orleans, 95% of all the jobs come from small businesses and entrepreneurs. And after the trauma is taken care of, the rebuilding of New Orleans is done by NGOs and, most importantly, entrepreneurs, because we have to restart the supply chains. The other piercing moment of clarity in that range of emotions, and I say range of emotions, the 5 basic emotions, sad, mad, glad, ashamed, afraid, the one that surfaced was one of gratitude. Because rarely does someone lose almost everything in life except what's most important. I had my health, my family, my wife, my employees. So standing on the roof of my house after the worst natural disaster, I made a commitment, because it was piercing clarity, to figure out how to support entrepreneurs because they provide the quality of life. It's the people in the communities that have the hopes and dreams and the aspirations to pursue their dreams, create economic opportunities for themselves and their communities. So we have some of the best experts in the world to talk about after the storm. But in the context for this meeting, it's really about the entrepreneurial imperative. How do we restart communities and how do we grow communities? So, let's start with David Gensler. He's an executive director of Gensler. He's an information management strategies company. David, take it away and let's talk for about 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me? My name is David Gensler, and it's an honor to be here. I actually run the largest design firm in the world, about 3,200 people doing architecture, planning, and design. And what I want to talk today about is what we've done to help communities recover from disasters, not thinking about the immediacy of the needs in a disaster, which many of my colleagues here will focus on, but really, what do you do in a disaster to build long-term resiliency and capability in the community? This is some information about the history of disasters, natural disasters, in the last 100 years. And as you can see, this is an upward sloping curve. The number of incidents, number of reported disasters with an inflection point in about the middle of the century. So that now, every year, we have about 400 natural disasters that impact a tremendous number of people. In fact, this is a slide that shows the number of people affected by natural disasters. And now we have a correlation between the number of people affected and the number of disasters reported. That's about 500,000 people per natural disaster are impacted, and over 200 million people every year impacted by these events. What surprised me when I looked at the data was this picture, which is the mortality rate from natural disasters. The mortality rate has in fact fallen from over 400,000 deaths per year to about 40,000 deaths per year. And that's per disaster. That's a drop of about 99% in the mortality rate from a disaster. So why does this happen? What is it about this? Well, it's really about the capability that we've developed over the last 100 years to deal with disasters and to prepare for them as communities. The big improvements have been in healthcare, medicine, medical treatment, sanitation, the disaster response capability, first of all, communications, logistics, the ability to deliver food and water and to deal with the movement, transportation of food, water, and people. And finally, the built environment. How do we build communities, buildings that can withstand natural disasters? My world is the built environment. We design buildings, we design large-scale land planning, urban planning that are all built to sustain natural disasters. The question is, how do we go beyond what we've achieved already to minimize the impact of natural disasters on people? What we focused on is designing for resiliency, really trying to help communities recover more quickly and intelligently from disasters. So how do we define that resiliency? Resiliency is defined as the ability to, let me read here, is the ability for the capacity to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change in order to recover, to reestablish yourself to the state that you were before, to recover, to learn, and to build flexibility. These principles, this big idea, it drives the principles we use. First of all, before you rebuild, you need to plan to make sure you don't repeat the mistakes that you had before. Secondly, you need to build capability in the community. You need to foster the ability to have a sustainable community that goes beyond just the built environment, but the built environment's integration with the capability of that organization, of that place, and to enrich sustainability of the economic, social, and biological systems of that place. So we aren't really in the business of disaster recovery. We have 2,000 clients, and we do 5,000 projects every year. It's not really focused on disaster recovery, but we have 3,000 people in our firm and over 100 nationalities. So every natural disaster, somebody in our firm is affected. And we've got a program of matching giving. The question is, what do we do with that matching funds? What we've decided to do is give our ideas rather than write checks. And so, for instance, in Haiti, we built a school, we designed it to withstand earthquakes, and we taught the local labor how to, new construction techniques that allowed these buildings to withstand earthquakes. And now they have a school that is earthquake safe and supports 600 kids. And then we taught CAD to young up-and-coming design professionals so that they could use the most modern tools in designing their buildings more effectively. So we believe that in the long run, it's all about recovery, learning, and flexibility, and that there's really a silver lining to a disaster, and that's the opportunity to make your community more resilient in the long run. So thank you very much.
Next, we have Michael Mosley. He has spent 38 years in the United States Air Force and is the 18th Chief of Staff and has been awarded the Kingdom's highest award. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Let me first say thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts and participate in a conversation about something that touches all of us, and something that touches all of us not in the real world, but also in the emotional world of how to mitigate human suffering on a large scale. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to participate in disaster relief and humanitarian assistance in a variety of locations, to include our own country following Katrina, but also in Pakistan, and in Africa, and in Asia. And from my perspective, I would like to share a thought or two to help set the stage on what are the elements of the attributes that define the problem the day after the storm, the earthquake, the volcano. And I think there's some characteristics that are standard. There are some characteristics of a tragedy like this that merit an understanding to be able to do better in the future. And those are immediate requirements for water, for food, for medicine, for shelter, for communications, for transportation, distribution, for connectivity. And by connectivity, I mean, how do you begin to move recovery and rescue elements in medicine and personnel? How do you begin the process to get at the requirements for water, food, shelter, communications? How do you get a survey team on site quickly to be able to look at how to open an airfield, which is the quickest way, how to open lines of communications into the site or the location, or how to open something as big as a seaport? Without those opportunities, then the event location becomes isolated and the human tragedy begins to expound exponentially every hour, every day. I would also say there are a million lessons learned in operating with the host nation, because you immediately get into concerns of security as you see looting, criminal elements, etc., that then begin to complicate the problem of recovery. So the stages, from my experience, are the initial response, the surveys to be able to get in and look and see what should be done simultaneously with the delivery of water, food, establishing communications, and addressing the immediate needs of the people impacted. Because if those needs are not addressed immediately, then they begun also to compound with disease and with other levels of human suffering. The engineering effort after takes a little more time. The engineering effort of rebuilding takes a little more time. But from my experience, in the first few hours begins to define the success of the overall operation. Because if you cannot get life-sustaining water, food, shelter, medicine, pharmaceuticals, and the right experts on scene, then this becomes very bad very quick. I'll defer to others on reconstruction and on setting the stage in the long term. But from my experience, in the first few hours, you begin to see if this will work or if there needs to be an adjustment. From the New Orleans and the Louisiana and the Gulf Coast perspective, we in the United States learned a lot relative to how to move large amounts of material even inside our own country. Complicate that by making that in Pakistan or in Mogadishu or in Indonesia over those distances, and it becomes a very challenging logistics problem. Let me close by saying, though, at the end of the day, this is about water, this is about food, this is about shelter, this is about pharmaceuticals and medicine, and to bring medical technicians in immediately while you begin rescue and recovery efforts, while you've done the surveys on opening communications and lines of communications with airfields, roads, and ports. So with that, from my experience, that has how the stage is set then for the next levels of dialogue and interface.
Interesting aspect. I mean, in most societies, we take advantage and assume that we have certain infrastructure. And then after the natural disaster, going back to school at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you get knocked down to the very basics, very basics.
The very basics, very quick, because 1 minute after the storm passes, the people impacted are in immediate requirements for food, shelter, and water. And those of us that are in the response, we are in lag by days to be able to get that there. So your film was excellent in showing that people say they haven't eaten in 3 days. They don't have water. And the human suffering begins to compound. I mean, I'm a military guy, but believe me, we take this very serious about being able to be quick and nimble to move an expeditionary hospital or an expeditionary clinic and large amounts of water and fuel, and to be able to open airfields and port facilities to be able to move. So you're right. You immediately get to the primary basics of life, and how do you sustain that?
We're going to come back to that. So let's go to Thomas. Thomas is the co-director of Bloomberg School for Center for Refugee and Disaster Response at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and he's a board-certified emergency physician. So let's talk for a few minutes about what you do.
Thank you very much. It's really quite an honor to be here. I'm a bit of an outlier because I'm not an entrepreneur, but rather a scientist and physician. But I did want to tailor my talk to the entrepreneurial spirit, and so I've titled the talk, The Business of Disaster Response. Because in fact, it is a big business. It's about $15 to $20 billion a year that globally we spend on disaster response, just on the response phase, not on the recovery or the rebuilding. And it's run in a very kind of complex and confusing manner. So I want to talk about some problems and ideas. The problems are on the left side of the slide. The ideas are on the right. And as you can see, the ideas kind of fit the entrepreneurial vein here. I'm looking at innovation, interventions in infrastructure, and other means of kind of entrepreneurial improving this problem. First, let's talk a bit about the problems. The biggest problem, I think, in disaster response globally, I've been doing this for about 25 years now, and 25 years, every time we do an after-action report, every time we go back and we look at issues, it's the same thing, the same problems over and over again, the same management issues, the same personnel issues, the same infrastructure issues, and it's very frustrating. And a lot of that problem has to do with the fact that the infrastructure for managing disasters is very complicated. Disasters don't occur commonly, and so there's not a strong infrastructure that exists. And when a major event arises, such as Katrina, Haiti, Pakistan floods, building the infrastructure and management structure is difficult. It's further complicated by the fact that when a disaster occurs, it's the nation that actually is supposed to run the disaster. And yet in a country like Haiti, the national government was decapitated. It was destroyed. Most of the ministries were destroyed. And so you get multiple players, the UN, the nation, outside governments, NGOs, that move in and help with the management. And so there tends to be multiple leaders and multiple players and very difficult coordination as a result. The other unique thing about disasters and difficulty is that disasters, the response actually isn't delivered as much by the government as by non-governmental organizations and private sector companies that deliver the actual services to the disaster. And they are not necessarily beholden to the actual people they deliver services to. And I think this is a big issue. Their funds come from donors such as the World Bank, DFID, USAID, and in fact, their allegiance is to those funders and not necessarily to those who are receiving the services. It's almost as if you were in a business and you have to make your suppliers happier than you actually have to make your customers. And so we don't necessarily engage the local population, we don't necessarily meet their needs because the NGOs delivering the services don't directly relate to them, and that's a big issue. The final issue that makes it real difficult to manage disasters is because frankly it's a disaster. It's a mess. You don't have information, you don't have infrastructure, it's hard to make management decisions, you don't have the ability to measure things or feedback or assess needs. And it's a very complicated issue. The problem that makes that even more difficult is it's the NGOs who are actually trying to deliver the services who are simultaneously supposed to be collecting management data. And then they simultaneously are supposed to be reporting to their donors about how successful they've been. And it creates this difficult management cycle that makes changing and directing the response difficult. So some of the ideas, I think there's two major themes that we need to talk about. One goes back to the management structure and the infrastructure, and the second is using data better and collecting data better so that we can implement a quality cycle. Right now in disaster response, we don't meet the quality cycle. We act, we do, we collect data, but we don't act on that data and we don't change our response. We need to complete that quality cycle so that we can use the information to change management response. It's difficult though, once again, because of the lack of people and the lack of available resources. So one of the issues we have to do is build personnel infrastructure, do things like training programs, and particularly at the local level, and engage local and nationals so that they're able to respond themselves without outside intervention. The second thing is things, and I think we've alluded to that. There's a lot of technological innovations that have been going on that are beginning to make a huge difference in disaster response. In Haiti, we had things like crowdsourcing, where people were using their cell phones to identify needs. I worked in a hospital in Haiti where we had this really cool machine that sucked water out of the air by a company called Aqua Sciences, provided water for our entire compound, for all the people. There's other people building shelters that can be popped up immediately. Technology is helping to drive response, and the entrepreneurs who use that technology are helping to drive that response. The next one is this idea of measures. I think this is important. Because we live our lives in management simply on anecdotes, and we don't have the ability to measure, we have not been able to affect change in disaster response. And I think it's up to the entrepreneurial and competitive spirit to be brought into this response in order to help affect those changes. We need the ability to objectively collect information, to act on that information. And in my mind, the best way to do that is to engage the local population directly. We need to go out to them and say, what do you need? Did you get it? And use that data to not only feedback and drive the response, but what I'd like to do afterwards is to create a report card so that we can begin comparing across disasters, which we're not able to do. We're not able to say the response in Pakistan was a 3 out of 10, and the response in Haiti was a 4 out of 10. So we can't make long-term changes. And perhaps then we can use that information to actually judge specific NGOs or the UN or the US military. And we can give them a report card so that they can make things better. And we can create a competitive drive between these different agencies to improve our response in the long run. So humanitarian responders per se are not entrepreneurs. It's a tremendous group of people that just devote their lives to this type of activity. Some of the hardest working, kindest people that I've ever met in my life. But I think we need to use the entrepreneurial and competitive spirit like we have in this conference to help drive changes to make humanitarian response stronger and to make us be able to learn from our mistakes and improve the response in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Raul Singh. He's the founder and executive director of Global Medic. It also is Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People.
You can start rolling that video. So Global Medic's a bit of an entrepreneurial venture in the sense that it's a response mechanism that takes professional rescuers from around the world, paramedics, police officers, firefighters, emergency doctors, nurses, and it takes them and puts them into crisis zones in the first 24 hours. So what we basically do is we take the 911 system in Canada and in North America, and we put it onto the international level. In a country like Haiti, we had 2 inflatable hospitals deployed immediately. 61 hours after that quake, our surgeons were knee-deep in the blood of Haitians, removing limb after limb. Our water techs were out installing 64 water purification systems that would deliver about 1 million liters of water a week. And our material aid unit was out distributing about $2 billion worth of gear. This is 2 days into the crisis. The difference between us and other agencies is we use entrepreneurial ideas to get in quicker. We use folks that have that drive and desire to do really good work, and they have that professional skill set, and we suck all that drive and put it into the field, right? As opposed to the current system of disasters and disaster response. My contention to you, my statement to you is the current way that we do things is we've got the big donor governments, we've got the big institutions, we've got the big NGOs, and together they have an old archaic system to deliver foreign aid, especially in a crisis. We've got some great mechanisms like the US Air Force and the US military and other militaries that we as humanitarian agencies and actors and the people of the world that want to come in and provide disaster relief can utilize to actually deliver that aid. And they've done a fantastic job. We've got developments now in the way we rebuild and reconstruct, as we've heard, right, to make agencies or to make cities, to make buildings better. We've got phenomenal doctors and nurses that come in the middle. What this industry needs is radical change. Now, there's no way that any one nation can adopt a radical change that will change the policies of every other nation. The only way to make this radical change in terms of the way money is delivered is through the entrepreneurial spirit and the use of entrepreneurial products. This is the only way that change will occur. So in keeping with that theme, here's a few of the things we've done. We've gone to products that are low-tech, easy to install, easy to be used. For example, we utilize a 2-bucket ceramic household water filter system. About $50, a family gets clean water for a year. It weighs 4 pounds. A family, if it's in a war zone, can move from one camp to another and bring their portable water with them, right? Now think of this. That's $7 per person per year for clean water. And if we could get that to 10, 20, 30,000 families in the first 4 days after a crisis, how many lives will we save? More importantly, how little money did we spend to save that many lives? Now, the only way that we can get products like this out there is if products like this exist. Who creates these products? Entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs will come into an idea and they'll say, how do I make your industry better? How do I take your existing product, make it better, and put it into an existing market? We know the marketplace exists. We've just been told it's a $20 billion industry. We know there's different sections: the logistics, the movements, the housing, the emergency response. I would argue to you that the only way that we will get better, that we will save more lives, is if we introduce your entrepreneurial spirit to drive this industry and make it much more competitive. Thank you.
So I have a lot of questions for these experts, but this is the interactive part. You're here sitting in the audience because you are looking for some information. I want to open it up to the audience for any questions at this point before I transition to the second part. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. We'll get a microphone to this gentleman. Right here.
Can anyone hear me?
You can talk.
Can you hear me now? Great. At Global Medic, where do you find that supply chain of new innovations? Is it universities, in-house, or through other people that you buy in the open market?
Well, here's the worst part. There is no incubation center that's available for all these entrepreneurs to come up with products. We have to go out and search it, right? Now, there are certain products in the water realm that we can go find, but unfortunately, it's more us seeking out as opposed to people coming into the industry. And I'll tell you why that occurs. Because Remember, I said this is a stagnant industry, the age-old archaic day of big government and big agency. That is not a community that wants to be changed, right? So the people that go knock on those doors, that door is not necessarily opening. And we need to create either an intermediate level where this incubator can be created for people to come in and with these ideas. And if that doesn't work and you've got the best idea, come to us. We'll trial it, we'll test it, and if it works, then hopefully we can radicalize that change as well.
From the military's perspective, after an event like this, you always have what we call a debrief or a hot wash, and the elements of things that we did very well are normally offset by things that we could have done better. In the realm of what we could have done better is always a discussion about what could we have used differently. For instance, to be able for the doctors to move whole blood or vaccines without electricity or without refrigeration units, there are companies out there now that have refrigerated thermoses that you can move blood and vaccine. Once you put it in, it'll stay at the appropriate temperature for a week. There's a company called Accutemp in Dayton, Ohio that does that very well. There are companies out there in the case of Haiti that can move large solar generators, because once you get into the power generating requirement, if you use diesel or gasoline or jet fuel, for every 1 gallon that you burn at the site, it takes 14 gallons to move the 1 gallon. And so the massive logistics problem of moving fuel can be offset by the solar generator. And there are a variety of solar companies out there. There's one called Zero Base that has probably, from the military's perspective, we used it in Afghanistan, we used it in Iraq, we've used it around the world. You can set up and operate the doc's entire clinic off of one set of generators. So I would offer to you inside the military. Now the problem is that information is not necessarily shared with the entrepreneur that does this for a living. That is a piece that could be much, much improved.
We'll come back to that point. You want to go ahead?
There are some forums where this type of stuff is available, where entrepreneurs actually come in and demonstrate products. The World Association for Disaster Medicine has an annual meeting where they have a large hall and people demonstrate their products. In the US, there are specific disaster meetings, et cetera, where people come in and demonstrate stuff, which is fun because the toys there are super cool. So there is some forums for you to get that stuff out.
Let's go to the gentleman over here in the back.
My name is Sultan Mahdi. I find it kind of hard to understand. How does this business model go as entrepreneurship in charities or humanitarian services? I mean, do people profit from crisis? How do you make your business model to the global medic entrepreneur who said that they work with entrepreneurs? I mean, the business model is how many earthquakes will happen this year, how many floods or something like that. So it's kind of hard for me to grasp this kind of entrepreneurship from my point of view. Thank you.
Did any one of the speakers want to take that?
Sure. So the basic premise for the business model of Global Medic is to take the professional rescuer, put them into a disaster zone, and we're a charitable agency that does that. The place where we may have gotten lost in the conversation is we are a charity, we raise money, we respond out to disasters in order to save lives. There is a certain point in time where we have to buy products to give to people, whether that product is rice, wheat, pulse, dal, bottles of water, or whatever those products are. What we're looking for is we're looking for the entrepreneurial input to make lower technology, cheaper items of good quality that will give these services that we know are needed. And we'll use that charitable funding to actually purchase those products. So from the supplier side, that's the business model, that becomes your market. And from our side, make no mistake, there is no profit in what we do. We're strictly there to save lives.
Yeah, and from my perspective, what I experienced after Hurricane Katrina is you also have to remember the economy stops. First example in U.S. history where literally the economy stops. Let's put that into perspective. The devastation was the size of Great Britain. So when you're dealing with immediate trauma, you have life safety issues to deal with, but you also have to restart supply chains. And when you restart supply chains, it's generally the small businesses and entrepreneurs that have to restart to be able to create employment. Because people can't come back to a disaster area until there's jobs, and there's homes, and there's infrastructure. And that goes to my point earlier, that we forget how important role, the important role that entrepreneurs and small businesses play in the economy. I know you're anxious to say something, so go ahead, and I'll come back to you.
For the most part, in regard to technological development, the people who create a product for disasters, because they're rare events, it's a dual-use product. The two-bucket system that you mentioned was actually developed in Bangladesh, I believe, to provide water for families. Often some of the dual-use projects are military-based. And so if you're looking at it as a business model and a product selling rather than a service delivery model, you have to look at dual-use technology because there's just not enough of a market during a disaster.
So we draw a distinction between innovation and just normal supply chains. And there's an opportunity to innovate to bring better products to the market, but we also have to recognize that the infrastructure is very important in order to be able to innovate. So I know you're anxious to say something. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the case of Haiti, you had a 45-second event, January 12, 2000, 45 seconds, and the result of that event, that earthquake, was 120% of that nation's GDP being lost. That's the damage. So you have these instantaneous events, and yes, quite right, the two-bucket system is used for long-term water provision. It's fantastic, but now we can take that initial application, put it into the disaster setting, and guess what? We don't need to be running expensive, hard-to-use water purification systems for the long haul. It's a great transition out, and that's a perfect place for the entrepreneur. Here's another marketplace idea for you. In the minutes after the Haiti earthquake, or in the weeks coming after the Haiti earthquake, had you created some type of rock-crushing machine on a trailer and shipped it into that country, you would have had every agency and charity in the world throwing money at you to hire locals, give them hammers, let them put big rocks onto this trailer, crush that rock, and be able to move that sand debris left out. And I guarantee you would have done more for the Haitian folks than a lot of big agencies were doing in those first few days. It's the entrepreneurial spirit and idea that makes that happen right away, and this is what we're referring to, and here's the opportunity.
Any other last comments? Question over here?
Hello. I've spent a number of years with Red Cross UN and smaller agencies, and I believe that the world of disaster response, if we can call it that, is extremely open to innovation and extremely open to entrepreneurship. I think that the real issue is coordination. The experience that I have is that is really the crux of the problem. If we look at, I don't know if it's true, I wasn't at that one, but what I heard about New Orleans and Katrina was that Walmart was the best responder. What I heard about Haiti was that the Army's main priority was security, so having opened a bridge into Haiti, there was then actually a blockage between a military interpretation, which was security first, response second, and an NGO interpretation, which was forget about security, let's respond. And so it seems to me that coordination is the issue. Where does that coordination happen? And where can we harness some of the entrepreneurial spirit in terms of coordination?
Once again, I think this goes back to the complexity of the management structure because of the multiple leaders is difficult. But until we have the ability to actually judge what we did, we will never make any changes. And we still do not have that ability. I really think this idea of some type of objective report card so that we can go to such and such an NGO and said, you did a terrible job delivering water, that's going to be what drives change. That will create competition between these organizations. It'll make the UN and make other people stand up and start doing a better job. But until we have the capacity to make those judgments, we're never going to make any changes. And it's been the same thing for 25 years.
Yes.
Sir, I would offer to you that the challenge is you have to do both at the same time. You don't get to say, I think for the next 10 minutes I will focus on security, and then for the following 10 minutes I will focus on relief. Unfortunately, the kid on the scene has to do both at the same time. And the challenge is to educate and train the people involved that they can, in fact, execute both at the same time. Because if you have a security problem that is life-threatening, then Red Crescent or Red Cross or others have a very difficult time in performing their task if they are ducking rifle fire or criminal elements. And conversely, the relief effort has to occur immediately to mitigate human suffering. So I would offer, from my perspective, the challenge is to do both at the same time. You have to walk and chew gum at the same time. That's the challenge.
Want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the more humanitarian aid you deliver, the more secure a situation becomes, because the local element that you're dealing with is, they feel they're being taken care of. And vice versa. If you don't have security, you can't get that aid out there. I think part of the problem is in the big system, we've got these cluster groups, and quite often we call them cluster. I won't say the rest of the word, but it's a UN system where it's water here, health here, shelter here, medical here, and they're not necessarily all in the same room. And then all of a sudden, if you decentralize that even further into, well, water in this region, and maybe we need to come back and readdress this and say, you know what, an agency or a country or a specific entity will come in and take care of this area, all the facets, as opposed to just some of them. I mean, these are bigger picture elements, but the current system doesn't work. And the problem is the communication. I mean, even look at the four of us, we disagree on certain elements. We need to realize that the current system doesn't work, which I think we do agree. We need to figure out a way of getting the system to work. And I'm not sure that we can just wait, for the research to come back with plans. I think we need to intercede with some interactions right now and then come back with the plans to make that system even better.
I see a hand over here, and then we'll come back to over here.
Let me offer one more thought, sir, to your point. Remember, there is a host nation involved in this. The doctor's point was well taken, and the situation in Haiti decapitated effectively that government. But at the end of the day, relief efforts don't do relief efforts because you can. You do them at the behest of a host nation who is legally, morally, and ethically bound as a leadership element in that country. The challenge also is to establish collaboration, cooperation, and interoperability with that government entity who may or may not want you to do certain things. That becomes a whole different level of a challenge because it is, in fact, their country. So that's just another observation for you. Yes.
The gentleman over here.
My name is David Monroe. An area that interests me is how would you approach the case of repetitive, predictable disasters on the one hand, and on the other hand, slow-moving disasters, which we haven't come to grips with over the course of the last 50 years or so. A couple of examples. You've got annual flooding in Bangladesh, which creates huge dislocations, kills a lot of people. There seem to be no efforts at flood control that are effective in Bangladesh. But why can't these problems be solved? Why has no one really done anything about desertification in the Sahara regions in North Africa? The problem's been identified for years. There are small NGO-based efforts being made here and there, but essentially nothing's happening. There are such huge economic losses being sustained by people here. Certainly there are sufficient incentives to get everybody involved, including entrepreneurs. Why can't we go about doing a better job at that? I'd just throw that open for some thoughts.
Very good point. One of the statements I made is that Katrina didn't just cause the problems, it actually revealed a lot of problems. So does anybody want to address the gentleman's question?
Do we have a few days to do this? Yeah. There have been efforts done in countries that have chronic flooding and disasters. There have been efforts. Bangladesh has built specific structures that are resilient. And so in areas like that, there have been efforts. It's a whole different world with the desertification thing, because that's led to political instability, the collapse of central governments, and it makes responding a security issue, not a response issue, because it's continuous ongoing warfare. And so it's a very complicated political question. Clearly, the long-term global warming issues are going to create tremendous changes. A good way for you to develop dual-use technology, if you start thinking about global changes, those same technologies may be applicable to disasters. So it's a very difficult question to answer.
Anybody want to take it?
I would also offer from a military perspective, the sovereign entity, in this case of Bangladesh, actually has a vote in what they decide to do or not to do within their sovereign boundaries. Sovereigns make decisions for the most part in their own national self-interest. Looking at from the relative comfort of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia at a decision, we may judge it to be valid or less valid. But from their perspective, it's their country, they get to vote. Sometimes sovereigns make very, very wise decisions. Sometimes they make decisions less wise. Again, I think maybe 2-3 days we could solve the world hunger problem, but I don't know that we can influence on a global scale the decisions at the policy level to do what you suggested. It would be nice.
So you're saying it's a political problem more than a logistical or technical problem. That's what you're raising, is these things that don't create the attention and this kind of ability to respond to something because they're so slow moving, create a different kinds of problem.
In the world with the most focused media in the world, whereas this happens annually in Bangladesh, and most of the time nobody pays any attention. That's one aspect.
It's something I want to circle back on is the media and the lack of information on public in just a second, but I know I have an anxious man over here that wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
I actually have a two-part question. First of all, I wanted to personally thank all of you for doing what you do. You really are heroes. And my name is Abe Scher. I'm an entrepreneur. We responded as an entrepreneurial company to a problem in Haiti. We donated. But what was remarkable was the people like Dr. Tom Kirsch who are there, who drop into harm's way and give of themselves. And I wanted to acknowledge that you guys do God's work and you have day jobs, but your part-time hobbies, I guess, are heroes. So that was my statement. A two-part question. It seems to me that during a disaster, governments respond. Money is dropped down. There is chaos. But in terms of recovery or mitigation, that's where it gets complicated. That's where the money gets complicated. That's where it becomes more difficult to do business. So how does an entrepreneurial company bridge that gap where they can drop things in during a disaster and a week later, or several weeks later, when their innovation is no longer required, how do they bridge the gap into getting into preparedness and mitigation? And the second question is, you guys do this, and Dr. Kirsch said for 25 years the issues seem to be the same. What do you need in your centers from government and from private industry to help you do your job better?
Can you imagine, I think the answer to your question, Abe, is, let's look at Haiti. The first 3 months after Haiti, the world pounded out money. There was $50 million put in right away for the rescue effort for the first 6-7 days of pulling people out of rubble. And then for the first 90 days, tons and tons and tons, millions of dollars of assets, personnel, equipment, rescue units, food, water, you name it, went in. And then for the next 18 months, everybody pointed fingers. Who's in charge? Is it Bill Clinton, the special envoy? Is it the Haitian government? Wait, we're in an election. Should we really have an election at this point? No, we didn't have one election, we had 3, right? Who's giving the money? Who's releasing the money? If we went the other way and we said, rather than holding back these funds for development, if we spent that first 90 days putting in every single prefabricated housing unit, every single inflatable hospital, every single water purification unit that we could find from around the world, put them in that first 90 days, then that 18 months of everybody pointing fingers would have been set alongside of people putting up these housing units. And the situation that we'd face today, 2 years after, wouldn't be 500,000 folks living in camps that are so atrocious I'm embarrassed to call myself an aid worker, right? We wouldn't have that. We would have 200,000 people living in that because that initial response would have outdone what it is now instead of this money that's sitting around waiting. So I would argue that let's not hold back these funds. Let's put them in the early days, right? And I think that you need a more central response system, right? Because what happens now is what worked in Bosnia, what worked in the hills of Iraq, during the Gulf Shield or the first one, This is what we just replicate. We don't look at what this particular country needs, right? So it's just the same box moved over to another box, and it's the same people that are delivering it, even though it's completely a different problem.
You know, we were in a similar situation where for years we would basically write checks and felt like we were doing something. And what we decided was that we wanted to do two things. One is we wanted to wait till 3, 6, 9 months after the event when nobody was really focused on it because it wasn't in the media anymore, and use our funds then when they were more needed, we felt. And two, we wanted to combine that with our own company's expertise. So we would fund our own people going in to do things that built capability in the country. And that was just how our organization decided to try and have a better long-term impact in these kinds of situations. I think every company, every entrepreneurial company that has a commitment to giving and community outreach and engagement can find what it is uniquely capable of providing and how to do it the most effective long-term way. These guys are in the business of dealing with the immediate problems that follow the storm. But what happens 6, 9, 12 months down the road? People are focused, media is focused on some other storm, some other disaster. The money starts to move some other direction. So what happens to Haiti now going forward is something that is a different kind of problem.
I think that's a misnomer, though, and I don't mean to be too controversial with you. There's a big difference between the money that is given on day one, right, that's assigned. I'm the donor, I want to help Haiti, here's my $50. I'm the government, I want to help Haiti, here's my $500 million. There's a big difference between that day that it's assigned and the day that it's spent. So even though the media is gone 6, 9 months later, I guarantee you that lion's share of that money is not programmed, it's not spent. And the tragedy here, right, I have no issue at all spending X number of dollars to buy a machine that's going to purify water. What I have trouble with is losing that donor dollar into evaluation, oversight. Let me give it to this agency at the UN, who's now going to give it to this NGO at their level. Everyone's going to take their piece of the pie. That NGO is now going to work with the private NGO in that company, and because they're not based in the capital and that unit's got to go out to the countryside, they're going to work with another local partner. So the shrinkage, I'm going to say two things. The money doesn't always go right away, and the shrinkage is incredible. It just, it boggles the mind.
Anybody else?
Yep. I think this goes back to this idea of building capacity. Not only do we have to build capacity globally, the biggest problem, for example, in Haiti, there was one person in the entire country who was their disaster responder. One person, half of his family died, so he didn't go to work for 2 weeks. So there was no coordination whatsoever. We need to train in governments, in local areas, disaster responders and managers who understand the issues, who can help coordinate, who can help deliver stuff. It's a critical step in the infrastructure. If these countries just hang around and wait for the international community to swoop in and save them, it's never going to happen. There has to be managerial capacity at the local level and at the national level. And there's big movements in that. The UN and the US government has started training programs. And so there is movement in that direction. But without that capacity, without that expertise locally, it's going to continue to be a mess.
Looks like you wanted to say something. Okay.
Yeah, another thought for you on the military side. For the most part, large militaries operate independent of each other. When a regional calamity occurs and you put large militaries together from different countries, one of the immediate challenges is the connectivity between the two sets of uniformed operating entities, whether it is language skills, whether it is communication, whether it is linkage in the effort. That has been addressed over the last decade or so with large-scale exercises of regional militaries to be able to explore how to be interoperable. That is, quite honestly, been less than satisfying in being able to pull all that together. So even on the military side, which, to be honest, disaster relief and humanitarian assistance is not a primary mission, to be able to operate with other militaries is another area like the entrepreneurial business that should be much more aggressively focused. It is an area that militaries can deal with each other outside of hostilities that actually has a benefit.
You know, I think in keeping with the doctor's theme here, I think empowerment is one of the major things that we oversee, we don't pay enough attention to. You know, in our model, we try to empower the local responder because we'll go in the case of Haiti, you know, we'll go in and train local folks to run our water units, to put up our field hospitals, and they will run and distribute water daily. Over the years, over the early part of the decade, we worked heavily in Sri Lanka. And you know, in Sri Lanka, it's the decade of sorrow in that nation. They had the war, they went to peace, they had the tsunami, everybody thought peace would stay. Billions of dollars of aid money come in, then went right back to war, and now they've taken out their so-called terror threat. We've had a team in Sri Lanka that we've trained that has responded, you know, when the shelling starts and people have to flee, they come in and provide water into these camps. And the team is so good that when Nargis hit, the cyclone Nargis hit Burma, we as Canadians were not allowed in because our government has sanctions against the Burmese, right? We put our team in from Sri Lanka. Now, can you imagine this group of Sri Lankans that's so good at helping their own, right? We've empowered them to help their own, but now there are experts that are our lead team going into Burma. I mean, or Myanmar. If we call it Myanmar, maybe we would have gotten in. But you can imagine if we can transfer this knowledge and make, you know, more response units available in other countries with that same technology, the same idea, the same training, how much faster will we respond? Because remember, there's the two disasters. There's a disaster, there's the event that occurs immediately and the loss of life. Those people are dead, we cannot bring them back. It's that secondary calamity, the number of people that will die, will needlessly suffer. Those are the people that we are targeting. Those are our beneficiaries that we want to save. And if we can get domestic units trained and in right away, we've won the battle.
So we talked about a lot. We talked about having the right vision, governments. We've talked about lack of leadership. We've talked about lack of communication. Let's change the subject for just a second. Let's talk about the entrepreneurial spirit and the psychology of the disaster and how to rebuild the spirit of the people that have been impacted.
It's difficult because of the way disasters are run. In Haiti, for example, after the event, a lot of local entrepreneurs and NGOs arose and attempted to provide aid and services. But because they weren't plugged into the system, it was because they didn't have a track record of doing this, it was very difficult for them to get ingrained and to get the funding necessary. I think, once again, this goes back to prior training, prior leadership, understanding the system and then working to change the system. But it is very difficult for local entrepreneurs, the way it is today, to get integrated into a disaster response system, at least in the first 6 months or so. In the longer term phases, in the recovery phases, in the rebuilding phase, et cetera, it's a little bit easier. But during that acute phase, it's difficult.
I'm asking somewhat of a leading question. Does anybody else want to tackle that one? Go ahead.
You know, I don't think you're going to have any issue with the resiliency of the Haitian folks. The people that are affected by this disaster, they will respond. They will rise to the challenge. They just need a little bit of a, not even a push, just show them the door and where they need to get their funding from, and the responses will come. It's funny that we close the door on the locals. You know, every time we go into these WASH cluster and other cluster meetings, it's always foreigners around the table, and it's never locals, even though we're in their country providing assistance. So it tells you that the international community may not be that interested, right, in hearing the local response. And it's funny that we're going to continually give the same players the money to run the same products, but if they had a report card, right, maybe we wouldn't be doing that. So it is, you know, it is a sad state. We know you do this reasonably awfully. We know we don't know you. We're going to give this to the people that we know will be terrible, but maybe 6% of the affected population will get some form of assistance in the next 10 years. It's, you know, this is the problem of the way the system currently works. And it really comes back down to that simple goal of we should be taking more chances, right? We should be using more empowerment and using local folks in their response and opening the door for them. Peace Dividend Trust, phenomenal agency, right? Started by a Canadian. Props to Canada for that. They are in countries like Haiti and Banda and Afghanistan, and they develop lists of local companies and get those lists in front of the NGOs that are spending money. So you're rebuilding all those houses. Why are you buying your wood from Home Depot in Miami when you could be buying it from this company right here, who's been in Haiti, who is Haitian, and has been there for hundreds of years. So it's agencies like that that'll help make that difference.
I want to throw a hot topic. Yeah, thank you. I want to throw a hot topic in the middle here. I know that my perception of Haiti is what I get from the news. My perception of Hurricane Katrina, by contrast, is very different because I lived it and I experienced it. What I saw on the news was very different from what I experienced in the middle. And if our actions are based upon the information that we know, and cell phones are down, communication is down, like General Honore said in the video, let's talk about the important role that media plays in assisting or disabling efforts. Open-ended question.
What a double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's why I did this.
What a double-edged sword. The same media crew that is with your surgeons removing the leg of a 9-year-old child who was pulled from the rubble 15 minutes earlier and brought to you and is, clearly in this situation of a loss of life or limb, and that reports on the human tragedy and conveys to the world what the need is, will be the same crew that, has that great response, right? The world will open its pockets and say, we will give to you to help. Yet it'll be the same crew the next day that'll report about, the 19-year-old soldier from Chile who got panicked and let go his tear gas and probably shouldn't have while distributing World Food Program biscuits. And all of a sudden, the looting in Haiti is out of control, and that same donor may not want to give. Like, it's such a double-edged sword. But we cannot go back to a day, right? Look at the difference. We cannot go back to the day without having the media there because they police us, the transparency is there because the media is there. So we can't go back without it. I'll make that my statement.
Anybody else want to?
Well, I think the media is changing. What you see now is instantaneous information that has been liberated at the individual level. Cell phones, internet, people are reporting on it. So that provides the transparency. The media, in my mind, they're in the business of entertainment and publishing. And what they will publish is whatever sells. And my experience is that whatever they say is suspect. In my business life, in my experience with disasters, it's all about selling newspapers or advertising. It's not about truth-telling. But I think information is coming to us in a different way now. And so, we can see what's going on through the internet or through our mobile phones in a way that we never have before.
Anybody else want to tackle that?
I would agree with everything. Also, the notion that if you get yourself in the model of chasing the media, attempting to get the good news story, you've lost the initiative and the leadership. You must execute on the mission and execute on what's right, and then you deal with the media, but you don't have the media attempting to drive the train at the site. There's a difference there.
Let's throw it back out to the audience. Any other last questions? Because we've got one over here. Number 7, yeah.
Thank you. Just a quick question to Mr. Singh. The question of a report card, you're suggesting that there needs to be a report card. I was involved with NGOs about 15, 20 years ago. And at that time, the ratio of dollar given to dollar spent, 20% went into the program and 80% went into administration. And frankly, that caused a lot of donor fatigue or disinterest. And I'm wondering if that applies to the disaster recoveries, those who are involved. Is that similar? Is that ratio similar? Or is it much better?
I think if 20 cents on the dollar actually got to people, it would be 100 times improvement of what actually occurs today. That's how bad it is. And it's simply because the institutional government's giving to the UN, who gives to another big agency, and I just said it claws away. And it's incredible the profiteering, if you will, that occurs, right? And then the issue comes down to there's no legitimate report card on this. I'll give you the perfect example. If I write a grant to the Canadian government and I say I want to run this operation and here's my salary hours, here's my flights, here's all my oversight, here's my monitoring evaluation. Does that not sound like a management expense to you? Well, at the end of that contract, I can write in 7% for my management fee. So you see the way you can double dip. So think of it. If you have 25% of that entire package is for oversight, and you add another 7 to it, you know, you're up 30, 35% once you factor partners in. I mean, it's awful. But if you went back to this idea of central response, products, things that work, all of a sudden the transparency is there. I spent X number of dollars to buy this stuff and sent it in. And I've got the Air Force, I've got the military, I've got all kinds of folks to move it in right now, right? So there's no graft, if you will. The graft comes when that money that's been sitting for 18 months, 24 months is not being spent, and we want to spend it in local institutions, and we want to spend it other ways. And now the 6th civilian overseer that's coming in on a very big salary is under pressure to spend it, right, and just get it out the door. So I think the current system with disaster response is in no means anywhere nearly efficient yet, and I'm afraid of what the numbers would look like. I mean, I'd love to see it happen. I'd love to see what the actual number is, you know, overall.
We're almost out of time, and I want to thank Sagia for providing a stage like this to discuss disasters. Because from my perspective, again, these disasters are an opportunity to innovate and get it right, and an opportunity to rebuild economies and the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the right light. And if we can't do it during the disasters or after the disasters in a rebuilding effort with all the attention, we're certainly not going to do it globally. What I stay up late at night thinking about this is that when I see a disaster, and then I also think that there's every 6 seconds a child dies in Africa. There's slow-moving disasters out there. I had the fortune to experience, I should say, and say this cautiously, I had the good fortune to look at things from a different perspective during Hurricane Katrina. And we have the opportunity to get it right in these disasters and rebuild and create the right entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that really is the entrepreneurial imperative. So we have a couple minutes left. Closing thoughts from each one of our speakers. Start right here.
Great summation. Without sounding pessimistic, I would offer we are one day closer to the next event. And so the entrepreneurial piece of this from a military perspective is an ideal solution set to be prepared for what's going to be, we're one day closer to, whatever it is. So good point.
Look, I think the data shows that we are getting smarter, we are making improvements. The mortality rate is going down, the response rate is improving, healthcare, sanitation, built environment, tremendous progress. That said, I think every disaster is an opportunity for us to learn. For our organization, it's an opportunity for us to engage in social responsibility and citizenship. And I think every organization has an opportunity to enhance their connectedness through engaging in these kinds of situations.
So I think we were overly pessimistic about this. Once again, in responding, I am always humbled and impressed by the people who do this stuff. It is amazing. There is no sense of graft and corruption. It's an inefficient system. I think by bringing competitive, entrepreneurial, and business-like methods to this system, we can help to make this system better. And until we do that, we're going to have all of these people out there desperately trying to help, and we're not going to get better.
The need is incredibly large. The system does not work. The only way to change the system is through the injection of the entrepreneur.
The gentleman back here made a point about recognizing you as heroes and going in after the storm and doing what you do. I also want to recognize those first responders, those locals, the local fire, local police, and the community leaders that are there. Even in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and all these disasters, there is an incredible amount of humanity after these storms. And again, it was a time for me to reflect on what I have, what's most important. And hopefully the people in this audience has gained a little bit more information from these experts, and we would continue the battle to discuss how to be more effective. And I want to thank everybody for participating in a fantastic session. Thank you.